On this episode of the Naturist Living Show, Naturist Cartoons.
This episode of the Naturist Living Show is brought to you by Bear Oaks Family Naturist Park. At Bear Oaks, we offer traditional naturist values in a modern setting. Free your body, free your mind. www.bearoaks.ca.
Welcome to this episode of the Naturist Living Show on Naturist Cartoons. My name is Stéphane Deschaines. I'm the host of today's show and the owner of Bear Oaks Family Naturist Park. And as you can probably tell by my name with all the funny accents, I grew up French-speaking, and I grew up in Quebec where la bande dessinée, cartoons or graphic novels as they're known in English, is very, very common. I think probably far more popular in a different style than what you might see in English North America. There's certainly the superheroes and the comics do exist, but the graphic novels have a whole range of different styles. And if you've ever seen the series Asterix or Tintin or Tintin, as they say in English, you have a sense of some of the types of graphic novels and cartoons that are available. So it's very popular. It's a very unique style. So I was very intrigued to find out that there was naturist cartoons, naturist graphic novels out there a few years ago. In fact, I wrote an article for Going Natural a number of years ago. And I reviewed a variety of them, one from the UK, a few from France. But by far my favorite was one that came from Australia. From a gentleman by the name of Stephen Crawley. His book, at the time that it published, it was only one. It was called The Koala Bears. And what was really wonderful about it, what I really liked is it really told a story that I thought was naturist. It was about Loxie and Zoot, who were the owners and the managers of a naturist park in Australia called the Koala Bears, B-A-R-E-S, of course. And he's since published 12 more stories, nearly 400 pages of cartoons on the web, not in print anymore. Unfortunately, the print book, while it was popular with some, it didn't sell as many as he wished. So for now, he's limiting himself to the electronic medium, so you can actually read them free at The Bear Pit, thebearpit.com. What's fascinating about the stories is not just the topics that are real naturist stories, and you can tell he's a naturist, you can tell he's been in naturist environments, but also the fact that he depicts every body type and shape without really any bias against any of them. There's all the colors, there's all the shapes, there's all the ages, short, tall, skinny, heavy, male, female, young, old, everything is out there, and it's fascinating to just see how much care he takes to really illustrate the reality, and yet he maintains the tone and the fun that I expect in a graphic novel, especially having grown up more with the French side of the graphic novel world. His stories are definitely appropriate for all ages, and they contain lessons for naturists and non-naturists. They poke fun at naturists as well. We can laugh at ourselves and some of our own hang-ups. But they also poke fun at the many textile misconceptions we have. I mean, you recognize a lot of the situations that show up in his stories, and you appreciate the way he tells them and the way he illustrates the problems in the textile perceptions or misperceptions, misconceptions. So, as you can see through the magic of the internet and computers, I've been transformed into a cartoon. The image that Stephen was so kind to draw for this episode features myself and himself doing the interview that you're about to hear. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and listen to the interview that I did with Stephen Crawley. So tell me more about yourself.
Well, I'm a cartoonist and I live in Sydney. I've got a small apartment. I've got one room that I've got set up for cartooning in. and another room which seems to be overflowing with comic books, because I'm also quite a big comic book fan, and also quite a few naturist magazines, that sort of thing, because I'm also a very big, how can I be a big naturist fan? I'm just a naturist. But I find the magazines are quite useful for reference and so forth, and also keeping up with things that are going on within the community. And yeah, so I do a fair bit of research around that.
So which came first, naturism or cartoonism?
Oh, definitely cartooning, because I've been doing it since I was about 7 or so. I think I can sort of remember starting to get into the idea of cartooning from a fairly early age. My family certainly wasn't into naturism at all, so it's kind of been a learned thing. I do remember, though, when I was quite young, probably about 8 or so, I used to live in Perth, which is the other side of Australia from where I am now. And on the news, I saw this is like the 6 o'clock news. They had a report about a naturist resort that was either having an open day or had just opened. I can't remember the name of it. Might not even still exist. And so it was a full-on report. It kind of had the fairly standard 70s stereotypes included, but as an 8-year-old, I was thinking, wow, that's amazing. And so it kind of, I think, was my first hint around that, because even though it was the 6 o'clock news, I suppose because it was the 70s, they felt at liberty to show a lot more than they might show on the news these days. It's kind of a bit strange. I think we've gone backwards in a number of ways. But so from that age, I started to get an idea of the concept that people didn't have to always be wearing clothes. And it wasn't until I was at university some years later in Sydney that some friends decided it would be a great idea to go to one of the local beaches, and didn't take too much to talk me into the idea, and from that point on I was pretty much sold on the concept. But the cartooning definitely came well before actual practical naturism did.
How did you combine the two? When was your first cartooning, a naturist cartoon?
Just recently, last year, Loxy and Zoots, the cartoon, celebrated its 10th anniversary. They weren't quite my first naturist cartoon. I sort of toyed around with the concept a little bit before I started Loxy and Zoots, but not much before. In terms of my cartooning history, I used to work with a company here in Australia, one of the very few cartoon companies that doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but it was an educational publisher. So they did a lot of comics around legal rights and housing issues and racial issues and so forth. So they had a fairly broad brief, but it was all educational, and they had an approach of trying to make because they were putting across a message and they wanted it to actually be absorbed by their primary audience, which was young people up to the ages of 17 or 18. They tried to take the tact of not being very preachy about the information that they put across, and trying to make it entertaining, and have the story to be the integral part in getting across the concept. So that was in some ways a bit of a training ground for me around the concepts of doing my own cartoons, because I was very interested at the time in natural therapies and good eating, that kind of thing. So I thought, well, it seems like I could do comics around this kind of thing as well. And somewhere in the mix then I started thinking, well, I could do one about naturism as well. So that's where the idea started to come from, and the first Naturist cartoon that I attempted and never really finished was one where a group of friends go down to the beach, and some are into it, the idea, and because they've been doing it for a while, whereas a couple of the others have been talked into it, so they're not, they're a bit nervous and unsure about it. But I only got about 1.5 pages into that before I kind of felt that it wasn't really a story as such, and that the chances of getting it published were probably pretty slim. So this is over 10 years ago, and the internet was only just starting to be a thing. And the only way to get anything published in those days was either in magazines or do it yourself. So I figured that rather than attempt any kind of large story, I'd just start with small half-a-page type cartoons that I might be able to pitch to the local Australian Naturist magazine, which was Sun and Health in those days. It's sort of around these days, but in a different incarnation, I think. But anyway, they agreed to print my first cartoon, and that was Loxie and Zoot cartoon. From then, the internet started to pick up a bit more. I did another cartoon for Sun and Health, but they didn't publish that, I think primarily because they, a half-a-page cartoon basically took away half a page worth of advertising revenue for them, so they went with the advertisement rather than the cartoon. But a friend got me interested in the internet, and I started to think, well, I could start publishing this stuff online. So that was more or less the start of the idea. I did several cartoons worth of Loxie and Zoot before I decided the whole thing was too difficult or wasn't working the way I wanted to, and pulled the plug on it. And it wasn't until a few years later that I actually got into doing the version of Loxie and Zoot that sort of finally made it onto the internet in a big way.
What I love about Loxie and Zoot and about your Naturist cartoons is how realistic it is, how it really portrays the ideals that we all talk about in naturism, but that don't always get portrayed the right way, in magazines. The pictures in some magazines or in advertising certainly is always still kind of the beautiful bodies and the same looking people. You have an incredible variety of body types and skin types and ages and genders and personalities.
Well, I think to some degree, can I step back just a sec on that, because it's not just, I think it's probably not just in Naturist magazines, although sometimes they certainly make an effort to cover some variation and so on, but I think that problem is probably throughout the entire media industry, and certainly within comics themselves. It's that whole thing of body beautiful, especially, buxom young women, that kind of thing is a very big thing within comic books, but within the media in general. It's all about, image. What the place that I used to work with before used to do was, because they wanted to engage in their audience, with their audience, was that they, the only way to do that is to be inclusive. So all of the comics that they produced had young people. Well, it was mostly around young people, but of course they had adults in there as well, but they were young people of different ages, different body types and different ethnic backgrounds. because Australia itself has got a fairly large migrant population. We've got a lot of different ethnic backgrounds here, so the comics kind of reflected that as well. I guess I kind of realised, like looking at comics generally, they don't have that. And in starting the Loxian Zoot comics, I felt that I really wanted to be inclusive. So to have a wide range of ages, body types, racial types, and so forth, without that necessarily being a focus of it. I try quite hard, I think, in a lot of cases, to just avoid focusing on it. It just is what it is, and I think that's kind of like, once you're at a naturist resort, that's what it feels like too. It's kind of, you've got people there and they're just people. So I wanted to bring that into the comics in a way that kind of just made it seem fairly seamless, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and in fact, let's talk about comics for a minute. I have a somewhat unusual perspective, because having grown up first French-speaking and then English-speaking in Canada, I saw French and Belgian comics like Asterix and Tintin, which I think you've told me before you read before as well in English.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then in English, the more American style of comics, which tends to be very realistic superhero, but realistic drawings and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
What are comics? What is it to you? What is it, just for kids?
Well, I think comics can be for kids. Comics can also be for adults. It's like books can be for kids and books can be for adults. Same with movies or anything. I think generally, though, for a long time, the comics were perceived mostly for a young audience. To some degree, they've matured a fair bit, but I think it just depends. That the comics can be pitched whatever way you want. There are some very adult comics, of course, and there are comics for kids, and it covers a fair range. For me, I guess any comic that tells a good story that's engaging probably doesn't take itself 100% too seriously. It's the kind of comic that I enjoy reading as a kid. Asterix, and we tend to call it Tintin here, although I do know that the pronunciation probably is meant to be Tintin, but we call it Tintin here. Those comics were certainly the ones that I primarily grew up on, and it wasn't until I was a teenager that I became more interested in the American superhero ones. And then I guess once I hit my 20s, I started becoming more interested in the comics that were, they say they're for a mature audience, but they're not those kind of comics. They're comics that just happen to have, I guess, a broader theme rather than superheroes, and tackle it in a more adult way. But they say those kind of comics are for mature audiences, I guess, to keep their kiddies away from them. So I've had a fairly steady diet of comic books over many, many years, and I suppose I've tended to incorporate those aspects that I enjoy the most out of them into my comics.
Loxian Zoot is not your only comics. Tell us about the other ones.
The other one is a superhero comic called Magellan. It's about superhero cadets. And I kind of approached it in a similar way when I was starting it to when I started Loxian Zoot, was that it had a fairly large cast of characters. It has basically nothing to do with naturism, although there are a few characters within there which have more laid-back or liberal ideas around body image than some of the other characters. But primarily it's just meant to be a superhero comic. It's kind of, to some degree, it makes fun of some of the more serious superhero cliches, but on the other hand, sometimes it embraces those as well. And I guess it's a bit more mature in that it has, unlike Loxie and Zoot, and it has some violence in it and coarser language, and so yeah, it's definitely quite a different comic in some ways to Loxie and Zoot, but it still has characters of different ages, different body types, different racial backgrounds. But that's probably, and it's also drawn in a similar style. But yeah, everyone wears clothes in that one, more or less, most of the time. And I started that up kind of as a circuit breaker. I think I find that if I work on one thing too much, my brain tends to implode, so I need to have something I can bounce between. When one thing becomes a bit too much, then I can go to something else. So currently I'm working on both at the same time.
So, with regard to Loxie and Zoot, what's your objective? Where are you going with it? What's the future of the strip?
It tends to change for me from time to time. Some years ago, my idea was to, get a book published, which I did do, and then I kind of expected, well, the sales from this will help fund me to start doing more of the comics and print more of the books and so on. The sales didn't quite achieve that objective, and as a result I essentially didn't publish any more books and have kept the rest of it online. What I then noticed after a few years was that a lot of the stories I tended to come up with weren't specifically about the characters Loxie and Zoot. And I think the difficulty for me in working with those two characters is that they're relatively content with their lot in life. They run their own naturist resort, the Koala Bears, and so a lot of stories work better when there's a little bit of conflict or there are issues to be resolved amongst characters, and the tendency with Loxie and Zoot was that they didn't necessarily have anything that needed to be resolved beyond the first story, in which Tex Tyler, the guy who doesn't like them very much, decides to ruin their open house situation. But once I kind of realised that the stories that I had in mind were largely for other characters, I decided to rename the series into The Bear Pit, and that enabled me to bring in a whole range of different characters, and often the stories didn't necessarily even have Loxie and Zoot in them, or not very much. So if there is to be any kind of future direction, I'd say it's probably more along those lines. There's certainly a lot of stories that I'd like to tell. The problem is trying to find the time to do that. So I tend to only be able to produce 2 pages a week, and sometimes less, and very occasionally more, but it's on average 2 pages a week. So even a 20-page or a 30-page story takes some time to finally tell. And at the moment I'm kind of working my way through a fairly epic story, which I kind of admit I never expected I'd be doing again, but this one is currently up to 100 pages and has at least another 20 to go. So once that story's finished, then I think I'll be reassessing where I am with the comic strip. I can't imagine that I probably will stop doing it anytime soon, so essentially there's just going to be more stories, probably of a shorter length. And certainly I keep wanting to actually engage with a few stories that are more particularly meaningful for the naturist community, or at least for people who are curious about the lifestyle. I tend to try and cut the comic two ways, in the sense that the audience is both naturist and non-naturist. I know that a lot of people who read it because they like comics, but they're not necessarily interested in naturism. And I get emails to that effect. People saying, "Oh, I really like your comic. Don't know if I'm into naturism, but I like the comic." And I never intended the comic to necessarily be a polemic or something that was, meant to be propaganda for naturism, although I've had that levelled against me by some people. So my intention is to try and maybe look at some issues within the naturist community, but at the same time keep it open enough that people who aren't so much a part of the lifestyle can enjoy the stories and relate to what's going on as well. There was a story I did in the Bear Pit a couple of years ago called Chicken Little, which kind of focused on a young man who was planning on going to the naturist resort, the Koala Bears, with a female work colleague that at the same time was petrified that his penis was too small. And I kind of got into that story as an idea because it's probably one of the number one topics that seem to always be on naturist forums, naturist magazines, general discussion about people who are thinking about getting involved in the lifestyle and so on. And that story proved to be one of the most popular ones at the time. Certainly the readership increased quite a bit during that story. So I think trying to approach stories that might work for naturists and non-naturists seems to be the best mix. And I figure that probably it'll be more of the same once I finish the current story.
I think the way you're doing it most of the time is great anyway, which is that the message for naturism, when you live it, doesn't have to be spoken. Whether it's propaganda or not, I don't know, but you obviously think it's great, and I think it's great, so obviously we're going to say good thing. I think propaganda is when it's not true, and I don't think what you're saying is a falsehood. But I think when you create a story that appeals to everybody, but the naturist message is there obviously anyway because they get to see what it's like and they get to see body acceptance, I think that works great anyway.
I agree with you about the propaganda thing. If it's not true, then it is propaganda. I think, though, that especially with the very first stories that I did, I was quite a lot younger and quite a bit more naive, and even then I was trying very hard to make a story that wasn't preachy and was fun and so forth. And I think, by and large, that managed to hit that mark most of the time. But because when people, especially if they've been brought up in a culture where, nudity's bad or nudity's weird or their body is a thing to be ashamed of, they read the subtext message, or even in some cases there was a little more kind of blatant message, I suppose, in the first story particularly, where naturist characters talk amongst themselves about how great the lifestyle feels, which, as you and I know, is something naturists do all the time. You get them in a room and invariably the topic will turn to, this is a great lifestyle, we really love it, and so forth. So I was just trying to put that a little bit into the comic as well, as a touch of realism. But people who weren't naturists actually saw those kind of discussions or comments as being propaganda or as being soapboxy. And I guess to some degree there were some people who also felt that some of the decisions by textile characters to try naturism also seemed like a bit of rubbish or very unlikely. And yet, as you and I both know, that's also often the case. You have people who are kind of like, oh, I don't want to, I really couldn't do this, I couldn't do this, or, I'll go along, but there's no way I'm taking my clothes off. And within half an hour, they have, and they're loving it. So it's kind of like, for me, when I'm writing the comic, I'm trying to think, well, how do I cut the line on this? I think what I tend to do then is I take out any discourse about naturism and just let the actual characters speak for themselves without speaking directly about it, if you know what I mean. And I think that's where I sort of tend to go with the stories these days. It's invariably different when there are characters who come into the comic who are body conscious, have never tried naturism, think that it's a bit on the weird side. So those characters are going to tend more to highlight some of the issues around naturism than characters who come into the story who are already naturists. So I'm kind of always mindful of downplaying specific messages, and occasionally there's been at least one or two stories that I've done where it never gets mentioned at all. It's just the characters happen to be nude and having an adventure of some type. So that's the way I try to sidestep any labels around propaganda from detractors. I mean, that still happens anyway, but it makes writing the story much more interesting, I think.
Let's talk, doing this podcast, like this is going to be probably a 1 hour podcast, give or take, by the time we're done. Takes 4 or 5 hours. I can't imagine how you manage to do 2 cartoon pages per week. How do you do the cartoon? What tools do you use? What steps are involved, and how long does it take you from start to finish?
Okay, well, the production process starts with the story and me. Sometimes I'm a bit more diligent with that, and sometimes I'm less diligent with that. I really should sit down and plan the entire story out 100% before I get started. Usually I have a concept of the story and what I want to have happen in it without a page-by-page description of where it should all end up, and certainly no script. I find that I tend to work that I can work if I allow that flexibility to come in, but it has its downsides as well, which I'll mention shortly. But so I start with the idea of the story and start to sort of sketch out small pages, usually half a normal page size, or less, just as what's happening for the next few pages or so, and the dialogue. Then I'll turn that into a draft of the page that I intend to do. A draft might take anywhere between an hour to a few hours to do, just depending on how difficult it is. Sometimes when a page has got a lot of things going on in it and a lot of characters, and I'm trying to convey some fairly dense information in comic book format, which needs to be much more condensed. That can take quite a bit of writing to get it right. Other times it's much easier because there's only maybe one or two characters, and there might be a bit of general action like moving around or doing other things. So that those pages tend to be a bit quicker to draft. But when I used to work at the other company, they had a process of doing drafts before they took it to final art, and I find that the draft itself allows me to work out the bugs in the story. It allows me to work out where I'm going to position the characters within each frame, within the page, and how I'm going to arrange the panels. I tend to... there's one kind of thing that I tend to do with the comics that I'm producing these days, and that's not just for Loxie and Zoot / The Bear Pit and for Magellan, my other comic. So I tend to draw the page specifically for reading on a web browser, in that a normal comic page will be, like in a comic book, will often have some crazy panel layout, and we'll have a whole single panel down one side and little panels along the other side, and those are designed to be read or seen at one glance. As soon as you turn the page, you can see the whole page and you can see how it's meant to fit together. Whereas I think that on the internet, that's a bit harder to do given the dimensions of screens. Probably not so much an issue now that screens are getting larger, but I tend to try and make the panels more easily digested for a web browser. So usually no panel is more than half a page in size, so it can be sort of seen first thing once it's loaded into the browser. So I take some of those things into consideration too when setting up the page and planning the page. Once I've done the draft and I'm happy with that, I'll start working on the black and white artwork based on the draft. The draft, although it takes a bit of time to get that done, also helps reduce the amount of time it's going to take me to work on the final black and white art. And in fact, sometimes the more time I spend on the draft, the less time I've then got to spend on black and white artwork, because I know exactly what the expression on the characters' faces are meant to look like, what their body posture is meant to be, and how they're engaging with the other characters. The black and white artwork will take anywhere between usually at least a couple of hours and sometimes a lot more, just depending on the number of characters within any particular panel. Because the Bear Pit has a lot of characters, sometimes they'll all be in one panel at once, and that can take several hours to draw. Back when I first started doing Loxie and Zoot, I wasn't quite so aware of that particular thing, so I tended to have lots and lots of characters in every frame, and then I soon realised that was what was taking so long to produce each page. So I tend to kind of keep the character numbers a bit lower these days, but certainly that increases the page length, the time it takes to produce a page. So generally speaking, it'll take between 2 to maybe 4, even more hours to actually draw the page. These days, because I draw a lot faster than I did, say, 10 years ago, that makes a difference too. And the more I draw, of course, the faster I get, because practice helps, even with the amount of experience that I've had drawing. And then once it's drawn, I do all of this by hand, using paper and ink. I don't draw on the computer, mainly because I find that I can get the style that I want much more easily through using pen and paper. Then I'll scan that into the computer. I'll add the text. That itself can sometimes take half an hour to an hour, depending on how much text there is to put in and position and move around and put in speech balloons and so forth. And once the text's done, then I'll add the colour to that. And again, that varies depending on the complexity of the page, between an hour to 2, sometimes 3 hours. So all up, a single page itself, from beginning to end, can take a good 10 hours or more. Which, of course, because I have a day job, which doesn't involve me sitting down cartooning at home. I've got to go into work 9 to 5 days a week. The cartooning process usually happens in the hours around that, either first thing in the morning or in the evening, and always on the weekend. So a lot gets packed into those hours. But yeah, so it can be a fairly lengthy process, which is why sometimes, I only get one page done a week. And if there's a lot of things going on in real life for me, whether that's work-related or family-related or socially related, then that can also have an impact on the amount of time that I can spend on the comics themselves. More it's a pity because, I suppose it would mean more cartoons, but unfortunately I've got to have a life as well.
No kidding. And that's not counting the time you spend maintaining communications with your community, because I've noticed you're fairly active on a bulletin board as well.
Yes, well, there's a forum related to the Bear Pit, and it's probably not as busy now as it was a few years ago. There was in the intervening months, we had a comment thread that used to run on the actual pages themselves, but and people were starting to use that quite a lot, and it's certainly a good way to get feedback from readers. Unfortunately, there was a bit of a technical glitch with the program that runs that, and it was in some cases breaking the navigation that people need to use to move from page to page. So until that gets resolved, which might not be for a little while, I've had to close down the comments. But yes, I get feedback through the forum, and they're readers who are keen on the comic and want to be able to talk about that with other readers as well. And I also get a fair bit of email from readers who don't necessarily want to post to the forum, but still want to tell me what they think about the comic. Or fortunately, in most cases, that's always very positive feedback. I've only had very few, 1 or 2 emails which have been negative about the comic. But by and large, it's people saying that, they appreciate it, they enjoy it. In some cases, it's people saying, I wouldn't think I was necessarily into naturism. Some people saying that they've actually decided to try naturism because of the comic. And in other cases, people saying that they now feel better about their own body because of the comic. So it kind of covers a fair bit of range. I tend to get quite a few requests for people wanting me to do art for them. Fortunately, these days people are now offering to pay for that. Sometimes, it used to be people were expecting to get stuff for free, but these days I say to them, no, sorry. So yeah, quite a bit of communication with readers as well.
You're in Australia. A lot of listeners don't know much about Australia and naturism. So here's your chance to tell us a bit more and sell a bit of Australia here.
Okay, well, Australia is, let me think of a good way to describe it. The people here are generally quite friendly, especially within naturism. I think the climate here is a lot more conducive to naturism than it may be in a lot of other countries. Certainly we have much warmer summers and quite mild winters. So it's possible, even in Sydney, to get quite warm summer days, as long as you're sort of in the sun and out of the shade. It's possible to get a bit of nude sun time, which can be great. But unfortunately, the general social attitudes towards naturism are just the same as in most other countries, in the Western non-European parts of the world, which is fairly kind of disfavourable to the practice. So it's a lot of the issues, I think, faced by Canadian, American and English naturists apply in Australia also. Probably one of the best states for swimming, especially nude swimming, would be Queensland, because it's a northern state, and for us northern means warmer, but it's a northern state, and nude beaches are totally banned throughout the entire state, and it's a very large state. It would do a lot for tourism in that country, but it's very conservative, and although there are kind of a few unofficial beaches, it's the only state within the entire country that has no official beaches. So anybody attempting to sample nude beach life in Queensland are likely to get themselves arrested. And because of that, because it's, even though we've got a very extensive coastline within the country, there are very few nude beaches by comparison, and so there tends to be more in the way of resorts and small operations. And by resort, I'm not talking 4 or 5 star, I'm talking fairly basic amenities. There are a couple of places that have been around for quite a few years, and they've got more than basic amenities, but the cabins are still fairly basic. Sometimes people live on those places, and they also have camping and camper van type facilities as well. Similar in a way to what you'll see in the Koala Bears resort that Loxie and Zoot run. To some degree, that's been based around my experiences with the various resorts over the years. When several years ago, I painted a mural at a resort in northern Victoria, and Victoria is one of the more southern states, but it gets very hot there in summertime, and there was a resort there that I went to paint a mural, and I just met a woman who was very shortly to become my girlfriend at the time. But, she wanted to go along. She'd never tried naturism before. I'd only known her for less than a week, so she was quite keen to get into trying that out. And she'd read the book, and she was an artist, so she wanted to help out with the mural and so on and so forth. But once we got there, within about an hour or so, she said to me, "It's just like your comic book." Just in terms of the way the place was set up, even though I'd never been to this particular place before, it was very much like the resort depicted in the comics. So I think anyone coming to Australia would find that, and going to the resorts here would find that usually there's a pool and some cabins and a central place where they sell ice creams and supplies, and a lot of bushland and a lot of trees and a few native animals and so on. So the setups here are pretty basic, but that's essentially the Australian way of doing things. Those resorts don't tend to make a lot of money, even at the best of times. So things are comfortable but basic. And yeah, there's a small community of people which really enjoy the lifestyle, and I think it also probably tends to suffer a bit from some of the other issues that are going on within naturist communities in Western countries, such as an ageing population and general, stagnation in some ways. Certainly there's a lot going on, and people are enthusiastic, but also at the same time, it's difficult to get young people involved, and it's hard for families to become involved, and for those families, once they've grown up, for those younger people to stay involved in the activities of those resorts, because they go off and find other things to do.
This episode of the Naturist Living Show was brought to you by Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park. Traditional naturist values in a modern setting. Traditional values means that naturism is more than just taking your clothes off. It is a life philosophy with physical, psychological, environmental, social, and moral benefits. Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park strives to promote those naturist values in a modern setting that provides the amenities and services that our members and visitors expect. Free your body, free your mind. Learn more at www.bareoaks.ca.